This is System Crash, a weekly tech news show willing to tell the hard truths about how tech and the titans who own and operate it is really transforming the world. I'm Paris Marks.
And I'm Brian Merchant.
The one and only. This system has just begun to crash, so support the show by heading over to patreon.com/systemcrashpod, where you can sign up to get monthly bonus episodes. We just did a new one recently on Peter Thiel and some of his recent rantings that I think you'll want to hear. Also, rate the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Brian, you held down the show really great with your guest host last week. I think you've evolved to being like a real podcaster now.
Yeah, I can claim my title officially, I think. And it's good to know that we have a replacement Paris waiting in the wings, another Canadian that we can.
I'm on notice.
I was wondering if you had come back because you took a much needed vacation, an actual vacation, not just like a trip to go give a talk or you know.
I was like actually properly offline for a few days of that vacation too.
Somehow though, where'd you go?
I was in Florida and the Bahamas. Yeah,
that's like just capital V vacation.
It is.
I was somehow. You have returned even more pale than when you left. How is that possible?
So the sun is shining in and it's making my face look very pale. I promise I did get some color. I even had a little burn on my face.
A little sunburn. Yeah. Okay.
I went on a hike and I had like a light, like a day-to-day kind of sunscreen on. And I was like, I should really put like a heavier sunscreen on before I do this like nature hike. And then I didn't do that. And I knew I was going to get burned. And I just wasn't in the mood to put on the other sunscreen.
Listener, let me tell you, it is imperceptible to the eye. I see no hint of you.
It's already faded away. I've came back. I shoveled like 35, 40 centimeters of snow when I got back.
And you got back to a nation that was not yet annexed to the United States.
Luckily, no. I still showed my Canadian passport when I came back in. And they didn't tell me, you're still in America. Yeah.
Well, I am glad you got some rest.
Thanks, man. Obviously I kept tabs on things that were happening, but I wasn't really like fully engaged in it while I was away. And then like now I'm in this period where I'm still trying to like catch up on everything. And like, I feel like there's so much that has happened over the past 2 weeks, with everything that Musk and Doge have been doing and all the agencies that they've been getting into. And there was also like the AI shit that was going on top of all of that with DeepSeek and, the consequences of that and, everything that has happened there.
Yeah, there's no way to possibly keep. I mean, it's just, there's things that I'm like, oh, I missed that. Somebody like pointed out the way that I phrased something online and they're like, oh no, they're already shipping migrants to Guantanamo. Like that's already happening. That's past the planning. And it's just, everybody always says this is by design. You flood the zone. It reduces the ability for folks to protest or resist, which, I guess they didn't even have to do because, the opposition party here is just unbelievably impotent in the face of all this.
Well, I feel like that's one thing that really stands out to me, right? Like when the Democrats and like liberal parties in general come to power, it feels like it takes forever for anything to get done. And like one of the things that really stood out about the pandemic was like, oh, look, they can actually act and do something if they need to or want to. But it's like the right and the Republicans get in power and it's like they do things so fast because they do not care and they want to see their agenda implemented. And especially when you have like these tech folks whose whole mantra is like move fast and break things, they're just going to go for it. But it's not just because the tech folks are involved. It's like this is how the right generally operates, right? They move fast. They want to change things.
And that parallel now has just been crystallized, right? Like now it's like, oh, that was the Silicon Valley mantra and, Facebook's sort of go-to slogan. And now it's just been clarified, I think, just how intrinsically linked now and clear just how alike those two imperatives, those two logics are, Silicon Valley's disruption, its move to sort of capture expansive market share at any cost, tear up the laws of, not stop to observe the rule of order, tear up any regulations and restrictions that might prevent it from obtaining more power in this expansionist move. It's just what the right has done. And now they've kind of met at the top, and it's, similar in vague sort of conception as to what happened last time with Trump, where there was a lot of, anxiety about, oh, what's he gonna, but this time it is very different. It's structurally different. The content of the assault on democracy is different. And the fact that, the opposition, that like Hakeem Jeffries, who's the supposedly leading the opposition effort as the chair in the House, is just saying things like, well, what can we do? We don't really have any leverage. So what do you want? So it's not like the spirit of opposition isn't even there. And I think it's been overstated the extent to which people haven't showed up in the streets. Here in LA, there's been people downtown protesting, blocking highways. There's been a lot of, community level action and some stuff in DC too. And but it isn't for either just sheer number of boots on ground or the attention that the media is willing to give it. It's just not registering in the same way. So already, you're trying to navigate this space of how concerned should we be. The goalposts are always shifting. But for me, and I think this is going to be the topic of what we'll talk about today in part, I think the worst day was yesterday when Trump signed an executive order basically expanding Doge's powers and saying, this is what we're going to do now. We're going to fire as many people as we possibly can. It's outlining this plan in this very sort of machinic language that's like, it is this almost like fantasy of, I described it as automation logic when I was right. Like, it's just like, we're going to trim headcount. We're going to use a data-driven approach to winnow the ranks. We're going to sort of hollow this out, and for the sake of efficiency, which again, it's an executive order. It's not a law, but it's basically kind of doubling down on the approach Musk has taken so far. And it's also sort of just kind of indicative of the fact that Trump is just kind of willing to cede this ground to Musk. And there's that bizarre press conference yesterday held in the Oval Office while Musk was there with his son X, just kind of like picking his nose and crawling around and rooting around in his Trump's office. And Trump is just kind of sitting there, and people are asking Musk questions about like how the government's going to be run and what does this mean, and do you have any conflict? We both agreed that like these ideas that Trump and Musk were going to have some just climactic falling out like right away. These two egos just couldn't possibly navigate each other, so it was going to be this fiery explosion. I think a lot of liberals were really hoping for. I think this is just kind of like, at least for now, the emphasis that it's not going to happen. He's fine with this. His nature is different too, right?
There are contradictions within the administration. Like, there's no question about it, right? There are parts of the Trump administration
100%.
that are not totally aligned with what the tech industry wants, and, might even do some things that are going to try to rein in some of their power, or that might not be totally in their interests, right? But I think people like Musk see that, there's enough benefit to sticking with this than to like blow it all up, because of the amount of influence and the amount of power that he has been able to carve out through Doge and through this like agency that has been set up, or department, or whatever you want to call it. He has all his little minions running around the US government, getting all this data, getting all this information, starting to fire people, starting to dismantle parts of the government. There's a clear benefit to him to keep this relationship alive. And I think that there's a clear benefit to Trump as well, right? Because even though they might not agree on everything, I think that there's enough that they are aligned on, and there's enough that Elon's project is going to contribute to Trump's larger kind of vision that is created and assembled by like the Heritage Foundation and these other interests, that they are both aligned on moving forward on this. And I think that this is one place where the right is often better than the left, where, they can recognize that there are contradictions, that there are disagreements, but there is this larger project that they mostly agree on, and that they are going to seize the levers of power as much as possible to see move forward. And, if there's certain things that they need to let go of and leave at the side, they'll do it, because in general, they're going to be moving forward this project that is beneficial to them and the world that they want to see created as a result of it, even if those of us on the outside of this can see that there are a lot of problems with it, right? Not just the concern about what this means for minorities, for immigrants, for trans people, for all these different groups that are being targeted as a result of the actions of the administration, but also even if like you're one of these like NatSec, American power matters, America needs to be dominant through the 21st century kind of people, if you look at the actions that the United States and that Doge and that the Trump administration are taking right now, there's plenty of reason to believe that this actually hurts American power in the medium to long term, maybe even in the short term.
Yeah.
As you let China step in on foreign aid and getting that kind of soft power, as you see these cuts to research and technology and stuff like that, so that the tech industry, so that Silicon Valley venture capitalists can profit, but actually leaving the door open to China and to other players to do this more kind of innovative work. Like there are plenty of reasons to believe that this hurts America's standing in the world. You have countries around the world now, Canada, Europe, Panama and South America, not to mention the Arab states in the Middle East, that are increasingly getting furious at the American administration because of their kind of imperialist tendencies and their short-term thinking, that you're kind of turning off all these potential allies or people who were really in your camp. So there are many reasons to believe that like making America great again, keeping America the hegemon in the world is being, hurt by this project, but they're going to charge forward anyway, because as long as this capitalist class dominates the United States and has this power in this particular country, it seems, and can try to use it as a bully tactic for other parts of the world, they seem to be ready to embrace this.
Yeah, I mean, and you could go one step further. I mean, I think, which is going to kind of be the theme of our show today, which is that it's not even just the capitalist class, which does sort of recognize the need to sort of stabilize things, at least to a certain point, at least to guarantee sort of returns on investments. Like this is the venture capitalist class that is ruling the country now. And it's all about short term. I mean, it's almost like pointless to even go through all of the contradictions and all this stuff. But like, Russ Vought, who was just appointed and is set to sort of, wipe out funding for, as you said, research and sciences. And that's one of his missions. He was a Project 2025 architect. His daughter has cystic fibrosis, and she was treated thanks to research that was specifically funded by these organizations. Doesn't matter to him. That doesn't compute. Even the material gains that have impacted their lives that they can point to, as long as it can be cast aside if it's not part of this broader sort of ideological project. And I think the only real risks that I do think that they face at this point is overreaching. Musk is out there tweeting now that he's uncovered fraud and abuse and waste or whatever at Medicare and at Social Security. And by the way, like he's still like the media has just let him run rampant with this framing. I mean, it's just stuff that he doesn't like or is like he's politically against, or even more accurately, that his Twitter followers sort of applaud him for pursuing. Like, Musk's ideology is paper thin. It's led almost entirely by sort of the pursuit of more adulation.
And also protecting his companies, of course.
And protecting his companies. But even that, I think now is like a way to sort of self-mythologize. He's not really that interested in the mechanics of a lot of the companies anymore. He's interested in Silicon Valley Tesla owner, the account on X, like tweeting collages of like his robots and of rockets going off and saying, this is the future, man, so he can retweet it to his followers.
But I think your point there on the capitalist class is really good, right? Because, you were talking about the anxiety of being in the United States right now and kind of watching what is going on there. And part of the reason that while I was on vacation, I wasn't totally up on what was happening in the United States was because, as someone outside the United States, we're also paying attention to the impacts on our countries that probably isn't getting as much play within the United States domestically, right? And of course, Canada and Mexico being threatened with 25% tariffs that were supposed to come into effect a little while ago, but then were delayed for 30 days. And, we'll see what's going to happen there. Obviously the threats to sovereignty around the 51st state and stuff. So it's like when I was checking in on stuff, it was, okay, what is going on? What is the latest threat that Trump has against us or against Greenland and Denmark or against Panama or against whoever else? Because there's this like element of it as well. But on that point, as you say, this venture capitalist class is really leading a lot of things because there are a lot of American capitalists that are saying, hey, this tariff plan would actually be terrible for our businesses that we have set up. The CEO of Ford was saying just the other day that the only thing they've gotten from the Trump administration so far is like more costs and disruption and whatnot, even though, Trump promotes himself as like defending the auto workers and all this kind of stuff. It's like that doesn't seem to matter because he has this particular idea of like, one, how the economy should work, but also like how American power should be worked and like deployed around the world. And it doesn't matter that that is like out of sync with actual economics and trade and exports and all this kind of stuff. He is going to pursue it regardless. And it seems like from looking from the outside in that the only things that makes him like step back from the brink are seeing the stock market really in trouble or something like that, right? When it really starts to react when these policies come into place. But how long will that actually work? How long will that stop him from these tendencies that he seems to have to want to move forward with these particular economic policies? Because we know he loves tariffs as a form of economic power that the United States can leverage. And it seems that he wants to use them to bring in revenue so that he can cut taxes for, the billionaires that we're talking about.
He likes the theater of it. He likes having to get somebody, like Trudeau to sort of make a meeting and address this. And even if it's, not deviating from what was previously planned, say regarding like the border force that Canada was going to deploy to control the flow of fentanyl or whatever, which was the ostensible reason for the tariffs. He just got the meeting. He gets some like sort of show of respect.
Well, it's like when Colombia was saying that they weren't going to accept the migrants or the deportees or whatever. Yeah. And they were like, yeah, because they're not like treating them properly. And then Trump said, well, we're going to put these tariffs on you if you don't, take the migrants. And then the way that the media reported it was that, Colombia and the Colombian president caved to Trump's demands because the tariffs were put in place. When actually my understanding is that America agreed that the migrants would be treated a certain way, as they were being deported, which met Colombia's conditions. Right. But the way it was reported was like Trump succeeds, you know?
And same with Mexico. It's all very blustery. But I do think, and I think that this is one reason why, like, I feel like his appetite for that bluster is diminished. He's older. He's, it's been 8 years since his last go round. I think he's already kind of like made his point. So I do think it is interesting somewhat from a psychological, perspective to be an armchair psychiatrist or something to say like what's different this go round, like because I do think he would not have been as willing to sort of let Elon take the show 8 years ago. It's almost like by getting elected and actually winning the popular vote was almost enough for him. We know he has very little interest or appetite in governing. He's always like the headlines and, sort of performing and the rallies. And so here's this guy who's all hopped up and, people seem to, pay attention to everything that he does. And they're going to, let him loose on the government. And that seems to be fine with Trump.
And the other piece of it too is that, yes, you have Elon Musk as like this very prominent face leading this effort, this like austerity, very political effort to remake the government through Doge and whatnot. But like there are also a ton of staffers, being put in from like the Heritage Foundation and these other right-wing groups that, were prepared, ages ago to be ready to go. All these executive orders and all this kind of stuff was like all pre-prepared. So yes, Elon Musk is very visible, is like the face of a lot of what is going on here. But you also have this larger right-wing project that was prepared for Trump 2.0 and that was raring and ready to go, right?
Right, and they're increasingly they're increasingly symbiotic. Like as you say, that there is some factionalism, and we are getting like a few of the more muted reports that Trump aides are furious with what's going on with Elon and all the attention he's getting paid and blah blah. But they're very much B plots this time. It's really not sort of affecting the thrust of things. And what really struck me this week, talking about like the short-term outlook of the sort of the new governing class, which is being led by Musk, a bunch of 19-year-olds from his companies.
The power that Big Balls is wielding in the US government at the moment.
Which, like, I mean, it is one, again, like a callback to Trump 1.0, where it's like, how terrified should I be of this? And, just the fact that Big Balls is there sucks, but it's like maybe that's not the existential threat. The existential threat is sort of the permission being granted to this whole thing. And, there's the lack of opposition from the Democrats, and sort of the only bulwark really being the courts at this point, which they're saying, oh, you can't rescind, that funding. And in some cases, they're just kind of doing it anyways. And I think this is where we're really reaching the level of constitutional crisis, as a lot of people are pointing out, and the fact that, functionally, Musk has seized just a ton of power over how these different bureaucracies work, and he's free to hollow them out, either replace them with Trump loyalists or not, or just sort of, starve them, which incidentally has been a long time dream of the American right, going, way back to the days of Grover Norquist, and even before that, shrink government down to the size of a bathtub. They must be giddy right now.
Don't forget to drown it in that bathtub.
Drown it in the bathtub, right. And so it is just, to me, it is one of these moments where it's just kind of like, if it's not necessarily a death knell for democracy, it is a point where its extreme weaknesses and vulnerabilities are just being like woefully exposed. I mean, Republicans are fine with this, for like Congress is, for all intents and purposes, being sidelined. Like, that's really telling, right? I think I touched on with Corey last week briefly that, if they wanted to get rid of US aid, they have the votes to do it. It was a law, right? But that was signed by JFK way back in the day, sort of initiating this whole apparatus to provide foreign aid. It was a law. You can't just tear it up if you're the president. We have Congress. Or at least that's the theory, but they're just tearing it up. They could have brought Congress to a vote, but they're kind of saying, and they're indicating that we don't really have any interest in doing that, and even going through the motions anymore. Like, we're fine with this. Everybody else seems to be fine enough with this for it to proceed. So this sort of, this short-term sort of logic of governance by big tech is sort of at hand. Not only that, Musk is installing Palantir executives into CIO roles to oversee, budgets of departments and information security. So it really is, this moment where Silicon Valley, and at least, a certain cohort of it, has quite literally seized power. And this week struck me for three different reasons, and we've been talking about the first one. But while all this is going on at home, sort of JD Vance is abroad, right? And he's in France at the AI Action Summit, delivering his very first sort of speech in the official capacity as vice president. And we'll play a little clip of it here, because here he goes.
The United States of America is the leader in AI, and our administration plans to keep it that way. The U.S. possesses all components across the full AI stack, including advanced semiconductor design, frontier algorithms, and, of course, transformational applications. Now, the computing power this stack requires is integral to advancing AI technology. And to safeguard America's advantage, the Trump administration will ensure that the most powerful AI systems are built in the U.S. with American-designed and manufactured chips.
The message basically is this: like, we're done thinking about AI safety. We're done thinking about regulations. He phrases that as opportunity, but it really is just about expansion and dominance. It's about dominating. He said our U.S. industry is going to be the dominant industry. Europe, India, Canada, if you guys want to join us, fine, but just don't get in our way, and don't even think about turning to China or using their technologies. That's the only thing that I'll like explicitly say no against. So at the end of this meeting, which is supposed to be all about finding like governance, sort of approaches and conciliatory opportunities for countries to sort of form a framework and approach to AI development going forward, the US, and then following the US, the UK, declined to even sign this very sort of milquetoast pledge to develop AI, safely and ethically and sustainably. We don't even sign it. Like it's and that's as much of a gesture as anything else.
It's such a small thing, right? Like this kind of a statement, coming out of the Paris AI summit is not, trying to really restrict AI development in any meaningful way. President Emmanuel Macron, the French president, kicked off the whole thing by announcing that there was going to be 109 billion euros of investment into AI infrastructure in France to try to take on the Stargate thing and show that Europe was still keeping up, right? Like they are still embracing the same AI model that the United States and American companies are trying to push forward. But as you're saying, like, I think what JD Vance is saying in this speech, and it's very nice that they have finally let him start saying things and making appearances and not just being Trump and Musk, but well, maybe it's not so nice with what he's actually saying, but he is going over there. And, he's saying the things that we have been talking about in the past number of weeks, right? That tech billionaires have been saying as well. People like Mark Zuckerberg and, Tim Cook has been mentioning as well, Elon Musk certainly, that American technology needs to be allowed to dominate, that these other countries cannot restrict what these American companies are doing, that they need to be allowed to, spread this among European countries, in Canada, among like the American allies. And we just need to accept that American technology and American AI now is going to be dominant, and that we are going to use it, and that we are going to be subject to it, and that is necessary, yes, to compete with China, but also for these American billionaires that, as you are saying, have basically captured the American government, are need to ensure continues to happen for their own power, their own wealth to grow, all this sort of stuff, right? So it's like, don't you dare, Europe, try to regulate or restrict what these AI companies can do or how AI can operate in your jurisdiction. The United States and American AI companies are going to dominate. We are going to be the most innovative. We are going to do what we want to do. And everyone else just needs to kind of suck it up.
Yeah. And you can kind of see the mood darken as he's giving that speech. Like at first, Macron is sort of like, kind of applauding him and smiling. And then as Vance moves through the speech, which really is just kind of this very, Vance was a VC. Peter Thiel was his mentor. I would encourage folks to listen to it because it really does encapsulate sort of a lot about the American ruling class right now. Just as you said, that we're going to dominate, that we don't want to have to follow your rules. And he very explicitly points out that it's a pain following, the EU's regulations, and that they, saying they should be done away with, in the name of, American might. We shouldn't have any sort of content moderation or censorship beyond the most basic harmful abuse materials and that kind of thing. But it is this very sort of imperialist tone that like America is going to do AI and you can join us or not. Our enemy is, he doesn't name China, but it's clear who he's talking about. And so it's framing like the development of AI as this American imperial project, to the extent that, the AI researcher and scholar Kate Crawford left that meeting and tweeted out like AI has officially, entered its empire era. And it's true because, again, this just calls back immediately to what's happening in the United States with the government, which is borrowing a lot of the sort of the frameworks of AI or what's going to be possible with AI, sometimes explicitly. Musk hasn't been using AI as much explicitly, but some of his deputies have, going to the GSA and saying, we're going to do an AI first strategy here, developing chatbots that are going to sort of not so subtly be doing people's jobs as they're firing everybody. And so we have these two stories about sort of AI as this great emblem and concentrator of power and this means of exercising power. And there's a third story too that I think this week. Yeah, go ahead though before we get to that.
I think the thing I would add to that, yeah, before we get to the third story, is just, if you think about that framing, right, and the way that the United States is approaching it under the Trump administration, as you hear from people like Vance, is if you look at Joe Biden, right, and if you look at the Democrats, they were sticking up for tech companies abroad. Yeah, they were talking about antitrust and stuff domestically, but they still wanted Silicon Valley to grow its market share, to go global. But they saw that the United States benefited from having these allies and these alliances and being involved in these international organizations, because that helped to extend American power, right? And that the United States, yes, was going to pay a bit extra, was going to make some sacrifices for being part of these groups, but ultimately they believed that there was a greater benefit to having these alliances, to not taking on these countries that, were its allies, to giving money to certain international organizations like the World Health Organization and stuff like that, because yes, they did things that were beneficial internationally, but also, they were often quite dominated by the United States and its allies, and so helped to promote this world order that the United States kind of dominated, right? What we see with the Trump administration is a real shift from that, vision of the world, right? Where the United States is the top dog, and it doesn't matter if you're a friend or a foe. It is going to use its power to extract as much from you as it possibly can. It does not believe that there's some kind of like international order that it benefits from, that it's important to have alliances and countries around you. Countries that are its friends can be taken on just as much as countries that are not. China is having a 10% tariff applied to it, but Mexico and Canada, its biggest trading partners, are being threatened with 25% tariffs, right? JD Vance goes over to Europe and basically says, don't you dare regulate our companies. American companies are going to dominate AI, and we are going to have the say over what this looks like. It's not like, how can we work together to build some kind of Western AI that is going to benefit all of us? It's like, America is going to win. America is going to have the benefits, and you all need to suck it up, even though you're supposedly our friends and allies and all this kind of stuff. It's a real shift. And, I wrote a piece a few weeks ago talking about how it looks like we're going to need an alliance of states against the United States and against the American tech industry, because it seems very clear that they have no one else's interests in mind. And if anyone is going to think about the interests of other countries, it's going to have to be those countries to finally stick up against this kind of regime, right? And what you're talking about with that Vance speech just, is completely in line with that. And it shows what the United States is now. And I don't think we can just say like, in 4 years, there might be a change again and something might shift, because we see very clearly that the Democrats tend to adopt things from the Republicans. And I don't think we can guarantee on this big reversal and this big sea change in the United States in 4 years, as much as I would like to believe that's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, AI. It's so interesting also to sort of pin everything on AI as well, and make this particular thrust so synonymous with AI in this context, because especially at this moment where the American AI industry has just kind of seen that it can be competed with on the merits, at least on the innovation side, with DeepSeek from China. And so far, the US approach has been, very much in line with something that Vance can understand and his cohort, which is just amassing more resources, piping more energy in, building more data centers, scraping more and more data, just getting big, just getting huge and massive, and making sure it's not woke also, right? He actually,
of course, yeah.
He calls that out in the speech as well. He's like, we have to make sure that it's like ideologically neutral, or which is of course just a fantasy. He cited that brief news cycle when we were talking about how Google's AIs was generating images of Black George Washington or something, and that was just like beyond the pale for, because again, that's very much coded into this project as well. It's not made explicit a lot of the times, but we can now understand the anti-DEI stuff to be just anti-people of color. It is just a way to sort of, at first, Trojan horse racism in, and now just be all but sort of blatant about it.
Yeah, we need politically neutral AI. That means any Nazi stuff is cool, but trans people don't exist.
That's exactly, I mean, it's a snarky way to put it, but that is the subtext, I think. Like, this is the machinery of a increasingly white nationalist state that is going to, export its values via this new technology, in part via American power. This also sort of kind of feeds into the third story that I think is also related. And, that's with none of these discussions really, again, sort of involve anything about quality, right? Like Doge, not interested if anybody's really doing their job well or whether the agencies function. It's just about efficient, just gutting. And yet people are cheering it on. Vance dedicates very little time to actually talking about what AI might actually do. What might be good about AI? We don't really know. It's just this broad sort of, generator of American greatness. And in the details, we get nothing. And so I kind of went, when I saw this news break about Meta, and that is that sort of Meta has long been kind of, I don't know if you'd maybe call it an ancillary or even tertiary sort of force in the AI sort of world. It has Llama, which is, quote, open source. It opens up sort of to other people to sort of use its technology versus OpenAI and Anthropic's closed models. But like, no one really talks about Meta AI, or what its actual AI products or what AI is, doing on Facebook that's so great. And yet there's this story that broke in Bloomberg that saw that hailing Meta's AI vision, Zuckerberg's AI vision, Meta has undergone like this historic streak on the stock market, 16 days of surging like in a row. So apparently that hasn't happened since 1990 on the NASDAQ for a tech company. So this is like unrivaled sort of growth at the moment. Just it's at 1.8 trillion at the time that we're recording this. So it's just up and up and up. And investors are talking about the AI strategy. And like, I've covered Facebook and the tech industry for a long time. And I'm thinking like, what AI strategy? What AI vision? So I'm looking at this and going back to like, okay, what happened in January? What happens in January is Meta announces that it's going to lay off thousands of workers as part of its pivot to AI. Meta announces it's going to invest $65 billion in AI, just to sort of indicate that it's a real player. It's going to keep going. And Meta gets embroiled in this privacy scandal where it becomes known that Mark Zuckerberg kind of personally okayed this initiative to like basically torrent people's books and then use them to train Facebook's AI model.
It's okay. No problem that they're stealing all the work, to train the AI. No issue.
Meanwhile, AI is sort of most prominent on Facebook and at the platforms as slop, right? People are using it in content farms, just shoot out content shit.
Do you mean Shrimp Jesus isn't real?
Shrimp Jesus. It's known for Shrimp Jesus. There's this 404 had this story about Instagram users were getting served AI-generated images of themselves on their feeds.
Oh my God.
Apparently it was some like weird beta test of they're pushing that out there. And then like AI bots and avatars are just like showing up in random Facebook group discussion. So by all counts, it's a mess. So investors can't be looking at that and saying like, this is the future, we like it, right? They can't really be too credulous about this $65 billion number because we all remember the metaverse, right? That was just a few years ago when Facebook said, we're going to transform the industry with the metaverse.
And they're still losing tens of billions of dollars a year on the metaverse.
Yeah. I mean, that would be a funny story to go back into like into Horizons or whatever there is. Who's there now? Is it like just like four people sort of wandering this desolate virtual
in the actual game or
in
whatever.
the virtual world. Yeah, Kashmir Hill did that funny story for the New York Times where she went like just a year after it launched, and it was just a few kids who had like put on the VR headset while their parents weren't looking, and like just like totally weird random scene there. But to me, all this just says that it doesn't matter, right? Like the details again don't matter. Facebook is a monopoly. Meta owns some of the biggest web real estate there is to be found. And so if Nvidia is sort of like, riding the wave because they're providing the shovels of the AI gold rush, then like Meta and Google, they just own the real estate, right? And so investors are saying like, okay, yeah, that's enough. Whatever you do with it, you're investing in it. You've placated President Trump. You've optimized yourself for minimal regulatory interference. If AI is going to be something, it's going to be something on your platforms. I really do think that it just comes down to that. And it's just so they're funneling more money, more capital, and just, more power. And that's, again, what matters, in the current state of play with regards to AI. They're not looking for a great product. These companies don't even have to pretend that they're building great products anymore. The closest thing, ironically, on this show, we're not big fans of OpenAI, but they made something new. Like they made ChatGPT. Like that was an app that was something new. And, it's starting to look to me a little bit like, I don't know that OpenAI, huge infusion from SoftBank withstanding, OpenAI is looking pretty vulnerable now. And we haven't even talked about its goofy conflict with Musk that also surfaced this week.
Yeah, him saying that he's going to buy the company for $97 billion or offering to, right? Benevolent Mr. Musk. But did I also see that they said that they're not becoming like a private company now or something?
So I think it's worth just pausing on this because it's just very reflective of like the mess that we're in and where we're at right now. So basically, OpenAI was founded as a nonprofit research company. Its charter, it was very explicit about this, was that it was going to be a nonprofit to make sure that all benefits from AI accrued in humanity's hands, not the tech companies and not the leadership.
It's working out so well.
How quaint. And Musk, of course, was a co-founder of OpenAI. He helped devise that charter. And so when they were moving, into a different structure where they were going to, need to have a CEO and jettison at least some parts of the nonprofit organization. Famously, Musk wanted to be the CEO. Altman won the support of the board at the time, and they pushed Musk out, and the two have been sort of feuding ever since. But as a result of this structure, to this day, the way that OpenAI works is there's a nonprofit board that controls the assets of OpenAI, the for-profit company. They want to get rid of that now because now it's just a huge stumbling block. They can't get in the investment at the levels they want. So they basically need to buy out the OpenAI nonprofit board, and they were going to do so for $40 billion. Like they say, this is kind of fair. And then once we've divested of those assets, we can convert into a for-profit company. So what Musk does is he doesn't offer to buy the company, he offers to take control of the assets for $97 billion, thus immediately doubling the market value. And now the nonprofit board, fuck Elon Musk, but this is like a very funny like intervention because it's the fiduciary duty of the board to consider the value of the company and make sure that it's not getting a below market rate. Now that rate is $97 billion. So they have to, if even some of the board members are like, well, yeah, we could get many more billions of dollars, then it at the very least, it just gums up the works, right? And I noted this in my newsletter this week too, but another funny sort of side quest in all of this is that OpenAI's very first government contract for enterprise GPT for its AI product was with USAID. So
no way.
And we can't read Elon Musk's mind, but I'm sure he knows this. And is there a world in which this whole mess starts because Musk realizes that he can find a very petty way to get back at Sam Altman, even if it puts millions of lives at risk around the world? This is the stupidest timeline. We have to consider the fact that at least played a role here. But anyways, so OpenAI kind of on weird footing now. Like, I feel like it doesn't have a monopoly. Facebook has this monopoly platform. Google has, the search engine that's basically sort of mandatory as of now, sort of web architecture for, most of the public to use, Facebook too. OpenAI has an app. OpenAI has ChatGPT and then its suite of services that it sells. And it's trying to make up for that with government contracts. That looks like it's less likely to happen now because Musk is so powerful.
Yeah. And ChatGPT, which makes no money and actively
loses that money every time you search on it. So what does it do? What does it do now that DeepSeek and other AI companies have turned its service into a commodity, right? And I think that's also what sort of investors are reacting to with Facebook. Well, if somebody's going to do AI and people actually want this, they're just going to do it on one of the web giants. They're going to do it with like Gemini, or they're going to do it with Meta AI. We can sort of just hedge our bets by pouring money into the thing that's a monopoly, that's going to remain a monopoly now that Lena Khan's FTC is gone, now that Mark Zuckerberg has kissed the ring. Yeah, I just think that, it's just sort of like the safest and most potentially profitable bet because these companies are not going anywhere. And I sort of see these parallels to Zuckerberg and co.'s sort of growing power and the way that, he's able to sort of wield the interest and what his company's doing with AI, for personal gain and to concentrate more power. To, Vance's speech, again, to connect it directly, move fast and break things. The coiner of that phrase itself has now profited so richly that it doesn't even have to try with the latest technology. It just kind of dribbles some AI out onto the platform and says like, there. And investors just like, yes, this is the greatest thing since 1990. And that's the world we live in. And Musk is in the government saying this can be automated. We're going to use AI for that. I don't really care. He doesn't need to understand anything, doesn't need to do anything. It's LLM logic. It's automation logic. It's venture capitalist ruling class logic merging at the highest level. And it is honestly, I don't know if I'm quite to despairing, but it is causing me endless reams of anxiety watching this all play out because we could talk about how the Democrats suck, or we can talk about how the courts might just be trampled, but like they've built this machinery that's so vast that our online world is so colonized and so controlled by these people, and that's how we communicate. Like, where do we begin to start pushing back? I think our best bet, as a lot of people have said, is through labor and organizing. But, we cannot underestimate just like the power that Musk has now, both being in the government and having Twitter, which is sort of like, just the agreed upon propaganda organ of the right now. It just is. What goes on there matters as much as anything. And we just can't compete with that infrastructure right now. So it's tough to see the way forward.
I think that's why I have been increasingly like trying to look for my hope maybe beyond the United States and seeing what other groups and countries beyond it can do to develop like some sort of alternative technological infrastructure or way of developing technology or thinking about technology that challenges this American model and this American system to push back on it. But there's not a lot of like concerted efforts toward achieving that at the moment. I think it's something that's going to need to be developed over the next couple of years if it's really going to do something.
And it will begin. There's more organizing going around, picketing Tesla plants. Like this Saturday, I'm going to do that.
You're going to go?
I'm going to go. Yeah, I'm going to find one and go. So it's like Saturday, February 15th at Tesla dealerships everywhere. I think this is an interesting way to do it because it is the new tech oligarchy. And I don't think as pessimistic as I am, I wasn't prepared for it to be this bad this fast. I think few were.
No, I agree with you. I expected it to be bad, but not this bad, not this quickly.
So we do have to build power in new ways. And so forget kvetching about the Democrats. We got to start just raising our voices wherever we can, using whatever tools we can. Yeah, I think there's a role for posting, and yelling online, but also, we got to get more bodies in the street. I like this approach of sort of finding sort of surfaces to resist, at Tesla and beyond.
I would say I would be joining as well, but there's no Tesla dealerships anywhere near me, up here in the cold north.
They don't allow Tesla in Canada. The
Yeah.
autopilot
You know
just
what? I
shuts
was
down
saying
across the border.
the other day, Trump said that he was going to put a tariff on Canadian-made automobiles or something like that. I think it was like 50%. I might be getting the number wrong. And I was like, you know what? The government should turn around, and the Canadian government, and slap a big old tariff on Teslas in particular. Like, just go right for Elon Musk. Like, not all the other car companies, just target Tesla in particular. I think that'd be the way to do it. But, I will say, Brian mentioned these protests against Tesla's Saturday, February 15th, I believe that would be.
We'll put a link in the show notes. There is other stuff going on. There's a website called Mobilize that I've looked at. Indivisible is helping to organize protests.
And there's TeslaTakedown.com, which I think is one of the key sites for this Tesla protest.
Maybe we should have somebody who's organizing with that on the show.
What do you think? Do a few final stories, wrap up the week?
Yes.
So first story, maybe if you were watching the Super Bowl in certain markets, you saw an ad from Kanye West directing people to his website where you would have had the option to buy a swastika t-shirt titled HH-01. I think you can see what that refers to. Well, that store was hosted by Shopify, of course, a company that I think we've talked about on this show in the past, because the executives of that company, which is a Canadian company actually, are very right-wing, fund right-wing media up here in Canada, and are very organized in trying to push the Canadian government to the right and ensure that a very extreme conservative party takes power in the next election. They are trying to bring some of what we're seeing in the United States with the relationship between the tech industry and the government to Canada. And so, they have had this policy for quite some time that Nazi stuff is totally cool on their platform. No problem. You can sell your Nazi memorabilia. You can sell your hate speech merchandise. If your lips of TikTok, Shopify will allow you to put that on its platform. Rachel Gilmore, who's a Canadian journalist up here, even reported that they removed part of their, policy against hate speech and all that kind of stuff a number of months ago. But after all the attention that Kanye and his store received, they took down his shop. And people were like, oh, so they have a problem with Nazis now? They have a problem with swastika merchandise? No, Shopify says. It came out and said, actually, its only problem was that it was concerned that this would be a fraudulent sale. And apparently that Kanye might not actually fulfill these t-shirts. So the issue was not the swastikas.
So people would not actually get their Nazi t-shirts.
Exactly, yeah. So you can't sell a swastika t-shirt and not actually give it to people. That is the Shopify view.
Well, it's good to know that you have your gruesome cadre of aspiring tech oligarchs as well up north.
Yeah, it's really terrible. And they've set up this new group now called Build Canada, which a bunch of Canadian tech leaders have put together, which, is about trying to push for their interests, for the policies that they want to see adopted. Shopify people are a big part of that. So I have no doubt that they are going to be putting money into the Canadian political process, if they haven't already started to try to shape how Canadians feel about these particular issues. And again, to try to push the types of things that we're seeing in the United States, in Canada as well.
Yeah.
Grim.
Well, grim indeed. And speaking of the Super Bowl, actually, this was supposed to be like the AI commercial Super Bowl. So I watched it and I kept an eye out, and like there was like it wasn't an ad, but it was before, like, they were like celebrating one of the sort of elder statesman commentators, and they turned him into like an AI avatar, and it was just like so weird. And it showed him like kind of like through time, like walking at different stages, and like walking in that weird sort of like stilted movement that, AI animation necessitates. And then they like cut to him and he was like crying, and it was like whoa. Well, OpenAI famously had its first like major ad that it spent north of $10 million or $13 million on, and notably made 100%, as many people pointed out, by human artists. AI.
No way.
Yeah. But honestly, I was curious, because the AI companies have gotten such flack for not showing up in their ads in the past. Google's terrible ad where it was like, here's a great use for AI. You can have your daughter like write a letter to an athlete using AI and not have any personal investment or connection at all. And everyone was like, why the hell would you want to do that?
Well, did you see Google had to edit their ad for this year as well because there was like a mistake that the AI had made in the ad or
I
something?
did see
Yeah.
that. I was going to mention that too. So yeah, really been a big week for Google. Also, sort of renaming the Gulf of Mexico the Gulf of America on its maps. I don't know if
But
you,
just if you're in the United
but
States.
just if you're in the United
Yeah.
States, yeah.
If we look at it, we won't see that.
That's right. Also, removing Black History Month from calendars. Is that right?
They removed a ton of things. Black History Month. I think some like, just other holidays that I guess minorities would be expected to celebrate. I wonder if they like added some Nazi holidays or something,
Goebbels Day.
the birth of Adolf Hitler to their to their calendar.
You used to make jokes like that, and it would be like, "Oh, ha, 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 like that's too extreme" or something. Like I would never make. But like, we got the guy who's just hanging out in the Oval Office, who's just like fresh off of making Nazi salutes, like on public.
Yeah.
It's just nothing is outside the realm of possibility. It's all conceivable, and it's all terrible. So on that end, I will end up with like one like flickering and sort of dim ray of hope. There was one good story that I managed to find after scouring the internet that's worth talking about.
Give it to us.
Yeah. And that is in a ruling in a case of sort of Reuters, Thomson Reuters, the parent company that runs the Reuters, the news agency, against an AI tech firm called Ross. The judge has ruled that Ross Intelligence did in fact violate copyright by scraping works and then producing output. And what the interesting thing to me in this ruling, and a lot of people were like, "Oh, it's not generative AI. It's a different kind of AI."
Yeah, because this lawsuit was originally brought in 2020.
2020, years before the recent generative AI boom. And yet, though, other legal folks have said, well, the logic that they're using on the fourth ground, because you have to go through four grounds to determine if something is fair use or not, really seems to apply to generative AI output as well, which is that the output is then used to compete with the original product. And so you can't do that. You can't just take protected works and then put it into the service of trying to take market share from the original work. And that's explicitly what a lot of output from Midjourney and DALL-E and images and text as well are aiming to do. So to me, who knows how powerful a precedent it will be? Who knows whether we'll have a court system that is functional, by the time the other AI companies, get around to litigating their own fair use trials that are still ongoing.
Yeah, I hadn't considered that aspect of it. Maybe it'll just go to like the generative AI agent who decides if your case has merit or not.
Yes, Supreme Chancellor of AI services. It's honestly like when the New Yorker is running articles like, "What if nobody listens to the courts?" Like, it's like they that was like literally a headline, something like that. What else can the courts do if they say like, that's against the law? And that's kind of where we are right now. The bend and sway of the legal structures that govern our country under the immense duress of the new venture capitalist overlords. Fun times.
Here I thought you were going to end us on a positive note.
Yeah,
I had to bring it back to
just the gravity of where my brain is at right now, pulling me back towards despair. But yeah, I mean, what can we say? It's bleak. It's a bleak moment, but we got to be out there talking to each other. We got to be out there starting to build bonds. We got to be imagining alternatives. We got to be pushing back. I mean, somebody was coming after me for saying like Luddism isn't really an appropriate lens anymore because it's just a more straightforward fascist project that we're seeing take root. And I was like, Luddism is more relevant than ever. Elon Musk ascended to power by exploiting labor, by touting his immense technological prowess, and by putting that in service of enriching himself at the expense of others. Luddites were fighting explicitly against that. And we need to be proverbially and otherwise raising our hammers, against those who have concentrated wealth and are now using it to oppress people. And I think we're really going to see how bad things can get if we don't push back. And I don't know. Again, like last time, feels like Could this be a turning point? Was this a turning point? Was that it? Was this it? Is it not? Is it all going to be? Who knows? But you got to push back to increase the likelihood that the worst doesn't come to pass, right?
And, with whatever happens, we'll be here to talk through it with you, to help you make sense of it, even though it looks very grim at the moment. System Crash is hosted by Paris Marks and Brian Merchant. Production is by Eric Wickham. Our theme music is Dystopia by our good friends in Yacht. Support the show on patreon.com/systemcrashpod to get a monthly bonus episode.
And I will say, if you want to talk about this, what's going on, if you have information or insight, if you're a government tech worker, if you are seeing some of this stuff up front, if you're organizing against what's happening in the federal government or otherwise, if you're an employee at a Musk company and you can't take it anymore, I can be found on Signal. Reach out to me on Blue Sky or Twitter. My email is public, or hit us up at the System Crash website if you're not worried about anonymity. But we can chat anonymously, and we'd love to have folks on the show who are starting to think about ways to push back against all this, especially if you're already in the trenches. And if that is you, then solidarity and all the best to you. It's going to take an awful lot to keep this system from crashing, and let's do our best out there. All right, bye.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe out there.